Imagine you're a servant in a grand medieval castle and you've just been handed the worst job in human history. Your master, a wealthy nobleman, has finished his morning meal. He calls you over, gestures to his private chamber, and says 3 words that make your stomach turn. Empty the pot. You walk into his quarters, and there it sits, a wooden bucket brimming with human waste, flies buzzing around the rim, the stench so thick you can taste it. This isn't a one-time horror. This is your life, every single day. Welcome to the medieval castle, where stone walls and tapestries hid some of the most disgusting toilet habits in human history. When we think of castles, we picture knights in shining armor, grand feasts, and noble lords living in luxury. But behind those thick stone walls, beneath the banners and the wealth, was a world drowning in filth. Medieval castles weren't just homes. They were fortresses built for war, and comfort, especially when it came to hygiene, was an afterthought. So where did people go to the bathroom? The answer is worse than you think. In most castles, there was no such thing as a toilet as we know it. Instead, they had something called a garderobe. The word sounds fancy, almost elegant. But don't be fooled. A garderobe was nothing more than a tiny stone room jutting out from the castle wall, often perched high above the ground. Inside was a wooden bench with a hole cut into it. You sat down, did your business, and everything dropped straight down through a chute built into the wall. Where did it go? Into the moat, into the courtyard, onto the rocks below. Sometimes it just piled up against the outer wall, rotting in the open air for months. Picture this. You're a soldier stationed at the base of the castle. You're standing guard, minding your own business, when suddenly, splat. A stream of human waste drops from above, splattering onto the stones beside you. The smell is unbearable. You look up, and there, 20 feet above, is the garderobe chute. Someone just relieved themselves, and you're standing in the splash zone. This wasn't rare. This was daily life, and it gets worse. In winter, when the wind howled through those narrow stone passages, sitting on a garderobe was like perching on a frozen toilet in the middle of a storm. The draft was brutal. The cold bit into your skin, and because the chute opened directly to the outside, rats, insects, and even birds could climb up through the hole. Yes, you heard that right. While you were sitting there, vulnerable and exposed, something could crawl up from below. Some castles tried to fix this by adding a wooden door or a flap, but most didn't bother. Privacy and comfort were luxuries no one cared about. But here's the real nightmare. Not everyone had access to a garderobe. Those were reserved for the lord, his family, and maybe a few high-ranking guests. Everyone else, the servants, the guards, the cooks, the stable boys, they had to make do. And by make do, I mean they relieved themselves wherever they could, in the stables, behind the kitchen, in the corners of the great hall after everyone had gone to bed. Chamber pots were common, but emptying them was a servant's job, and it was one of the most degrading tasks imaginable. Let's talk about those chamber pots for a moment. They were simple clay or wooden bowls, often without lids. When someone used one, it sat there, full and reeking, until a servant came to collect it. And where did the contents go? Out the window, straight into the courtyard below. There was no sewage system, no drainage, no concern for where it landed. If you were walking through the castle grounds and heard someone shout, "Gardy-loo," you had seconds to move before a bucket of human waste came pouring down from above. The phrase comes from the French "gardes l'eau," meaning watch out for the water. Except it wasn't water. It was piss and shit, and it was everywhere. The smell inside a medieval castle was beyond description. Imagine raw sewage mixed with rotting food, unwashed bodies, and the stench of animals kept indoors during winter. Castles were cold, damp, and drafty, so people burned herbs and incense to mask the odor. But it didn't work. The smell clung to the walls, the floors, the furniture. It soaked into clothing and hair. Visitors to castles often commented on the overpowering stench, but the people who lived there, they were nose-blind to it. They didn't even notice anymore. Now let's talk about what happened when you actually had to go. If you were a servant, you didn't have the luxury of walking to a garderobe. You grabbed a pot, squatted, and did your business in whatever corner was available. Wiping? That's a whole other level of disgusting. Toilet paper didn't exist. So what did people use? Whatever they could find. Straw, hay, old rags, moss, leaves. Some people used their hands and then wiped them on their clothing or rinsed them in a bucket of water that 20 other people had already used. The idea of cleanliness didn't exist the way it does now. Washing your hands after using the bathroom? That wasn't a thing. And let's not forget the communal nature of it all. Privacy was not a medieval concept. If you were using a chamber pot in a shared room, others were right there with you, talking, eating, sleeping. No one cared. Modesty didn't apply when everyone was living in filth. In some castles, there were communal latrines where multiple people could sit side by side on a long bench with several holes cut into it. You'd be doing your business while the person next to you was doing theirs, and you'd just carry on a conversation like it was the most normal thing in the world. But the absolute worst part of medieval toilet habits? The people who had to clean it all up. Enter the gong farmer. This was a real job, and it was considered the lowest, most degrading work a person could do. Gong farmers were hired to climb down into castle cesspits, the underground chambers where waste collected, and shovel out the sewage by hand. They worked at night because the smell was so horrific that it would make people vomit if done during the day. They waded through human excrement, often up to their waist, scooping it into buckets and hauling it away. The job was so dangerous that some gong farmers drowned in the sewage. Others died from the toxic fumes, and because they smelled so bad, they were banned from living near other people. They were outcasts, forced to live on the outskirts of towns, marked by their profession for life. And here's a fact that'll make your skin crawl. Castle moats, those picturesque water-filled ditches surrounding the fortress, weren't filled with clean water. They were open sewers. All the waste from the garderobes, all the garbage from the kitchens, all the blood and guts from the butchery, it all ended up in the moat. The water was thick, black, and crawling with disease. If an enemy army tried to cross it during a siege, they weren't just fighting soldiers. They were wading through a festering pool of human and animal waste. Some historians believe that the moat's disgusting contents were actually a defense strategy. After all, who wants to swim through that? But it wasn't just the moats that were filthy. The floors inside the castle were covered in rushes, dried grass, and reeds spread out like a carpet. Sounds pleasant, right? Wrong. These rushes were rarely changed. They absorbed spilled food, drink, vomit, urine, and anything else that hit the floor. Over time, they became a rotting, stinking mat of filth. Beneath them, the stone floors were slick with grime. When the rushes were finally cleared away, usually only once or twice a year, the smell was so overpowering that people had to leave the room. So how did people live like this? How did they survive in such disgusting conditions? The truth is, many didn't. Disease was rampant. Dysentery, cholera, typhoid all thrived in environments where human waste was everywhere. Life expectancy was short, and infection was a constant threat. But people didn't connect the dots. They didn't understand that their toilet habits were killing them. They thought disease was caused by bad air or divine punishment, not by the fact that they were literally living in their own filth. And through it all, the servants suffered the most. They were the ones emptying the pots, scrubbing the floors, hauling the waste. They had no choice. Refuse, and you'd be thrown out of the castle, left to starve. So they endured. Day after day, breathing in the stench, touching the filth, living in conditions that would be considered inhumane by any modern standard. So here's the real question. Could you survive it? Could you live in a medieval castle surrounded by waste, with no privacy, no hygiene, and no escape from the smell? Let us know in the comments below.